Okay, are we ready to get started? I just want to take a few seconds to welcome everybody to the annual general meeting for the Six Nations of the Grand River Development Corporation. My name is Nicole Martin, and I'm the chair of our advisory committee with the corporation. Tonight, we're going to take a few moments to go through our audits for the corporation as well as the trust. We'll also be having a question and answer period at the end of each audit, so we'll ask people to hold their questions until that time. You're able to ask questions via the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. Some of the items that we'll be looking at beyond the audit tonight are also a year in review for the corporation, as well as some looking forward aspects for the coming years. A little bit about the Six Nations of the Grand River Development Corporation group, our governance group here. We have the advisory committee, and what we do is provide some oversight into what's going on with the other boards. We also have our trust committee, which oversees the allocation of funds distributed out to the community. And then we have our board of directors, which oversees the corporation. Tonight we have a number of panelists available for you. Myself, Nicole, chair of the advisory committee, as the MC. We have Philip Johnson with us, who is the chair for the board of directors. We also have Rachel Martin, who is the chair for the board of trustees. Matt Jameson, our president and CEO for Six Nations of the Grand River Development Corporation. And members of our auditing team, both David and Matthew, are here from KPMG. So at this time, I will turn it over to our auditors to go through some of the items on there. If anybody is interested in following along or would like the materials, they're available online through the Six Nations EDT.ca/annual reports, as well as SNGRDC.ca/reports. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you, David and Matthew, now.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Just a little bit about myself. My name's Matthew Chardelli. I served as the audit manager out of KPMG and oversaw our audit of the Economic Development Trust for the year ended 2019. And I've also been involved in audits in the past as well, so a little bit of continuity there. I see it's coming up on the screen now. So we do have a few speaking points, and we'll start with our audit report over the financial statements and our audit opinion, and then I will highlight a few areas on the financial statements themselves. So if we want to go to one more slide, there we go. So I'll start here. This is the a little snippet of the first page of our financial statement after the title page for those that do have those open. And our auditor's report, of course, starts with our audit opinion, explaining that we've audited the financial statements for the Economic Development Trusts, and that comprises the statement of financial position, the statement of operations and trustee equity, the statement of cash flows, and the notes. So all of the pages contained within the financial statement document. And the most important part, of course, is that in our opinion, these financial statements for the year ended December 31, 2019, were prepared in accordance with Canadian accounting standards for not-for-profit organizations. So what that means, in simple terms, is that we've issued an unqualified or clean audit opinion, which can be considered good news. Now, the rest of our audit report, I'll speak to a little bit before we get into the meat and potatoes of the statements. Certainly the basis for our opinion, we conduct our audit in accordance with Canadian generally accepted auditing standards. And of course, in any audit that we conduct, we are required to be independent of the entity we're auditing, in this case, the trust. So always want to make that clear when we do issue our audit opinions. I think now is also a good time to touch on the fact that our audit was substantially completed in February and early March of 2020. So we were not impacted by anything related to COVID-19 or the pandemic. We were able to complete the audit in full, and there was no limitation as a result of those significant events that we're all dealing with this year. Now, the rest of our audit report just goes on to detail that ultimately the financial statements are, of course, the responsibility of management, and that those charged with governance, in this case, the trustees, are responsible for overseeing the trust's financial reporting. It also goes into detail our responsibilities as the auditor and some of the things that build up to our opinion. Lastly, you'll see that these financial statements were approved and issued in final March 25th, 2020. So moving on, I'll start with page 1, number 1 in the center bottom of the financial statements. And the first statement we'll talk about is the statement of financial position, also commonly known as the balance sheet. So for the Economic Development Trusts, the financial statements are fairly straightforward, certainly not too many line items. You'll see that assets are comprised of cash and distributions receivable from the Development Corporation and the Master Trust. So based on the nature of the trust, that at any point in time, there might be a difference between amounts that are physically held in cash and those that will be coming from the Development Corporation. It's really a function of timing, but any amounts receivable as at December 31 would be expected to be received from the Development Corporation shortly after in the next calendar year. And then on the liabilities side, you'll see that distributions payable essentially represents an amount nearly equal to the cash held and the cash that will be coming in. The nature of the trust is that it will receive distributions from the Development Corporation and the Master Trust, and then it will ultimately flow them through to beneficiaries in the community that have applied and successfully been awarded those funds. So because of that, the trust essentially operates at no surplus in any given year. Money in is always ultimately going to be flowed out. So we'll go to the next page here. This is page 2, the Statement of Operations, also commonly known as the income statement. So you'll see here that for those that have the statements open, revenues again represent money that has been flowed to the trust from the Development Corporation. In this year, that number is up from the previous year. And then there's a short list of the governance expenses for the trustees. And after that, a line that shows future distributions to beneficiaries. And again, that just means that essentially all the money received by the trust will be flowed through to the community. So I'll skip over page 3, as this is really just a summary of the information we've just chatted about. So I'll begin talking about the notes to the financial statements on page 4. So page 4 at the beginning, there's a note just quickly explaining the purpose of the trust, which we've touched on a few points here. And then the significant accounting policies. Really only one thing to mention, and that's that the financial statements are prepared following the accrual basis of accounting. So what that means is funds that have been approved to be distributed to the trust that are not received in cash as of the date of the financial statements are set up as receivable. And likewise, distributions that have been awarded to community beneficiaries that have not been physically paid out as of the date of these statements have been accrued as payable and show as expenses for the current year. So note 2, still on page 4, shows a breakdown, and you can see the amounts that have been declared by the Development Corporation and the Master Trust that will ultimately be paid to the trust, and later flowed out through to the community. So just a breakdown of the numbers that you saw in the statement of financial position. And if we turn the page in the financial statements for those following along, note 3, that shows the future distributions payable as we said. And I see a few questions here. So the financial statements would have been made available via the website. Rachel can correct me if I'm wrong there. So for those that do want to see the numbers that I'm referring to here, that's how you would get access to the statement. I think the last point for those that do have them is on the last page of those financial statements, note 5. That details the distributions to beneficiaries. So these are the amounts that are physically paid out during the calendar year 2019, some of which will be shown on a slide that we'll have up in a moment here. So I think that's essentially the walkthrough of the financial statements, and we'll pause now for anybody that has any questions about those statements or our audit this year.
So I'm seeing in the chat, people are wondering if they can access the statements. Are we able to post a link to those in the chat?
Yes, I'll post a link right now.
And it looks like that's all the questions we had just around accessing. So.
Okay, if nobody has any questions about our audit of the trust, then I think we are set to move along to the next agenda item.
So the next item that we have on here is the list of the recipients from Rachel. Sorry, Rachel, it looks like you're on mute.
Oh, okay, sorry. The screen looks totally different than our practice session, guys. On the screen, you guys are gonna see Public Works received $760,000, and that was to upgrade their plan for the future water distribution to different parts of the community that haven't had water yet. And then Zero on the Grand was $9,900, and that's the canoeing down the river every, I think it's July, with cultural teachings. Then I can't see the one because my screen is blocking. Hold on. The next one is the Golden Spoon, and we financed some equipment and stuff so they could give meals to the elderly and provide support. Then we have Six Nations Parks and Rec, which was $600,000, and that was for a new building for basically geared towards the baseball over there. There's a dressing room, washrooms, and food concession. And then we have the Sweetgrass First Nations, $10,360, and that was for a conference, sending our people from this reserve there. And then the Haudenosaunee Ways, and that was $9,800. Other dollars that were distributed were $455,000 for the Six Nations Fire and Emergency Services, and that was for a fire truck. $376,674, and that was for house services to upgrade. They changed their boardroom and kitchen, and updated their kitchen so they could service more clients and have more classes. And then 134,000 for the Language Commission, 21,090. That was for fencing and sign, or just fencing, upgrade their fencing. Six Nations minor hockey and lacrosse. That was for, they changed the rules for hockey, so they had to put dividers up. So the smaller guys have a smaller ice. Let me see here. And then we have the Grand River Powwow Committee that we sponsored for 3,840, and I'm glad to see Charlene is on the line. We sponsored the Anglican Church, $3,494, and that was to upgrade some of the deficiencies at the building. They were having some water issues. Chapel of the Delaware, I think that was the same thing. Six Nations Book Club was a, I think it was like a virtual book club. And that was all. That was all the projects that we sponsored. I do not have the 2020 list because we're just covering 2019 for this audit. And I think that's it. If you have any questions.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rachel and Matthew, for that update on the audit for the Economic Development Trust. I'm looking over at the Q&A to see if anybody has any questions. I did note that we put the links up for the audits, so they should be available there in the chat for anybody that's interested. And I'm just wondering, Rachel, if you could share with us when the next call is for the trust.
Right now, the second call was delayed for 2020, and then the 2021 has also been delayed. So hopefully we will have updates on our website soon, and because we have a new website and the Facebook page.
Okay. Just looking, I see we have a question. No. Okay. Okay, any last call for any questions on the Economic Development Trust? Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item then. And that is going to be the presentation for the Grand River Development Corporation audits. And that will be with David from KPMG, as well as Philip from the Board of Directors, and Matt Jameson as well, the President CEO, will be available as a resource for this. So I'll turn that over to you, David.
Great, thank you very much. Matt, I'm not sure if you want to say this, but there is a link to the MD&A. So maybe Matt, if you want to add your commentary on the MD&A.
Yes, okay, thanks. So as we've done in all prior periods since we launched the Development Corporation, management has assembled an MD&A, which is a management discussion and analysis paper, which is designed to be read in conjunction with the financial statements that will be presented tonight. I encourage everyone who has questions around specifics in the financial statements, if they want to go on a journey and learn more from the management's perspective about what things mean and why we've done the things that we do. The management discussion and analysis paper is a great tool. And in addition to that, we have on our website all of the historical MD&A documents since inception. So if anybody wants to go back and look at the history of our transactions and what was done and why, it's all there as part of our historical record.
Great, thanks, Matt. So first I'll talk about myself. So I'm David Marks. I am a partner with KPMG and have been the auditor of the Development Corp since its inception. I think that was 2016 or 17, can't remember which year, but for each year that it's been in existence, I've been the auditor reporting to you. I'll flip over to the opinion. Similar to Matt, we have issued our audit opinion on the Development Corporation. That was issued in May 13th of 2020, covering the financial statements, for the period end, and it's a 9-month period end for the Development Corp, which is important to note as we get into some of the details. Similar to the trust, it is a clean or unqualified opinion, meaning that the financial records that are presented are fairly presented within the financial statement. So Matt has kind of gone over the other details in terms of responsibilities of management and us as auditors, and that's no different for the Development Corp compared to the trust. Okay, so clean audit opinion, which is, as Matt says, is good news. Going on to the next page, we'll get into some of the details of the financial statements. I'll be talking about the statement of financial position first. So if you want to have a copy of that open off to the side, or if you got a printed copy, that is page 1 of the financial statements. So this is the balance sheet. Excuse me, recording all the assets and liabilities of the corporation. So from the Development Corporation's perspective, they've got a very strong balance sheet. Current assets exceed their current liabilities, which is always a good sign. So they've got enough funds to be able to satisfy current liabilities. And then there's a couple other major items that are on here that are captured, being the investments in the economic interest projects, which is sitting at about $59.5 million. That's all the projects that we've got that the corporation has invested in: wind, solar, etc. Throughout their duration. They've also got capital assets of about $11 million, which are have increased a little bit from the previous year, for some of the work done at Chiefswood Park. As well included in those assets is the gathering place on the Grand as well. So these are the 2 of the main revenue drivers for the corporation. So they've see that's quite an important part of their balance sheet. As you get into the other liabilities, or normal liabilities that you would expect to see, you can see there is the amount due to the trust that Matt had talked about of $3.4 million displayed there. I'll talk a little bit about the equity as we move into some of those other sections. So I'll flip over to the next page, which is the statement of earnings. And so on the statement of earnings, I'll let that scroll down first so that you can see that. So this will capture all the revenues and the expenses for the corporation. Very important thing to understand in this set of financial statements is the comparison between December 31st, 2019, which represents 9 months worth of operations, compared to 12 months of operations at March 31st, 2019. So during the course of the year, the Development Corp aligned their year end to be in alignment with the trust, make things a little bit easier going forward. So there is some analysis that need to think about, and the MD&A does refer to the 9-month period versus the 12-month period, and that is a lot of the explanation that is happening. So as you look at Nation Enterprises, that includes the bingo hall, you can see there's a significant decrease there, and that's really just due to reporting 9 months worth of revenues versus a full 12 months. So some important things to note, as you look at this. The other item that I do want to highlight on this is the economic interest revenues that have been earned. There is an increase from year over year, from the 9 months to the 12 months, and there was a special distribution that happened in one of the ventures that the organization takes part in, that saw an increase in distributions. And I think it had to do with their recapitalization, for that investment as a whole. As you move down to the expenses, the biggest expenses are the general operating and administrative expenses, which do house a lot of the expenses from the bingo hall as well. So you can see, they're down from the previous year, and again, that's in relation to 9 months versus 12 months. So at the end, the corporation had about 5.99, almost $6 million worth of revenues and earnings that were available for distribution. As you're aware, sometimes the corporation does hold some monies back for future investment, and we'll talk about that later. But then they've distributed $3.4 million to the trust. Okay. I'll flip over to the cash flow statement, which is page 4. And so the cash flow statement shows the ins and outs of cash for the organization, starting with the earnings of the organization, and then any movements in cash. So the important things to look at here are in the financing and investing sections, which are towards the bottom of the page. So you can see that some of the investments, were funded through debt and financed through long-term debt, which we've seen in the past for the organization. And then the biggest, is in the investing, where you can see that they've spent $15.5 million on investments during the course of the year, and about $2 million on the purchase of capital assets, and those kind of have increased those balances on the balance sheet that we talked about before. So from there, I'll move on to page 5, which is the accounting policies. Briefly on the accounting policies, they have remained consistent from year to year. This is important to see. It shows all the entities that are included within the organization. So you can see, all the number of companies and the various trustee companies, et cetera, that are part of the investments that the corporation holds. Okay. With that, we'll move on to page 10, which is note 5. And note 5 deals with the investments that the organization has. So I referred to the 59 million on the balance sheet. And so here's the investments that actually make up that $59 million that is recorded on the balance sheet. So year over year, we don't see too much movement for the top part, which are recorded at cost. You can see that there was an increase in investment in the Niagara reinforcement line of almost $12 million there. And then there was also an additional investment of about 5% in the Nanticoke Solar Limited Partnership. So that's the biggest increase in the investments in the economic interest entities. The last part of the chart, there's some entities that are accounted for using the equity method, which is a slightly different method for accounting purposes. And you capture your portion of the underlying investment within your investment on your balance sheet. So you can see one thing that certainly is noted and is discussed more in the MD&A is the Six Nations Aecon joint venture. So it did have a difficult year for various reasons that are laid out in the MD&A. So that has reduced the equity value in that based on a loss that was incurred during that fiscal year for that particular entity. Okay, I'll move on to page 13. Similar to last year, note 10, derivative option. One of the investments that management has, hasn't quite provided the return that they were looking for, and so management has worked with Boralex as one of the owners in the venture to help fund the operation. So again, in this fiscal year, they entered into a derivative agreement with Boralex for $1 million. So there's now 2 agreements that are entered into. That has been recorded on the balance sheet and recorded at the fair value, which is just over $2 million for the 2 options that are available there. Okay. I'll move on to page 14. which is the invested in capital assets and invested in economic interest projects. So this is the equity section of the balance sheet, and so really what these numbers represent, and if we talk about the invested in capital assets, it's the amount of equity that the corporation has earned that has been invested in capital assets throughout its history, less then taken away from that are amounts that were utilized from external parties to fund those additions. So in the end, they've spent about over $11 million. Some of those assets have now been amortized, but of the equity that they've got in the business, about $11 million is tied up in capital assets, which are then going to be used to generate future revenues for the corporation. Similarly, for the invested in economic interest projects, that's the total value of the investments that we've seen and talked about that has been funded through the equity of the organization. Obviously, some of it is funded through the equity of the organization. Other ports are funded through debt that the entity has acquired. So what the organization has kind of put in of their own capital to those investments is about $20.5 million. So again, these are funds that aren't available to be distributed to the community as they're held up in the underlying assets of the organization with the intent of generating future revenues. Moving on to the next page, page 15, note 15. There are a portion of the net assets and equity of the organization that the board of directors have set aside for the organization, and this is the internally restricted reserve. So as the organization looks to fund future reinvestment, pay down debt in the short term, create a bit of a reserve for themselves for operations for any unusual situations that have occurred, the board of directors have approved holding on to some of those funds. So about $6.2 million is kind of held off to the side, specifically reserved for various items, as you can see in this note, that those funds are not available for distribution to the trust. Now, what we will see is that in future years, as some of those commitments come due, those amounts will be released and utilized within the means of the organization. The last couple of slides that we've got, note 16 on page 16 shows the distributions that have been made during the year. Let that scroll up a little bit more. There we go. So you can see that we've got $3.4 million that has been distributed to the development trust. About 1.4 of that has come from the master trust entities, in the side of the structure, and then $1.9 million has come from the development corp and that side through the economic interest in what has been flowed through the development corp. So those represents the amounts that have been distributed during the course of the year. Okay. The second page, note B of 16, this shows, from the starting point of, the income that was earned before the distributions, how has that money been utilized? So if we look at the key aspects of it, we've spent, over $10 million to invest in, the economic interest entities, and some of that's offset by the debt that was borrowed on that. We spent certain amount of money on capital projects as well, and what has funded that is some of the those internal reserves that we had. So we started with the revenues and ending net income of the organization. Some of that has been spent, but we've also dipped into other reserves that we had used in the past, primarily in this case contributed surplus that was available from the previous year. Okay. The final note that I would like to talk about is on page 21, note 22. So a couple subsequent events. that are there. So the first one is another investment that was approved by the board that happened after year end, so that will be recorded in subsequent periods. And then the COVID-19. So there is a blurb here, just talking about the pandemic, and that it is going to have an impact on the organization as we go forward. Including the temporary closure of the bingo hall, and some of the other operations. So I believe there may be a bit of a discussion later on this evening about the future of the organization in that regard. Okay, so with that, I think that brings us to the end of the presentation of the financial statements, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you so much, David, for that great presentation on what's going on at the Development Corporation last year. I'm not noting any questions at this time from the Q&A section. So what we'll do is we'll keep that Q&A section active. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to pose them. And we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the Development Corporation Year in Review, and I'll turn it over to Matt to go over that. Oh, sorry, we do have one item on the Q&A there. Oh, no, just someone saying okay. I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
Okay, thank you, and thanks, David, for running us through the audit. I know it's complex. It can be overwhelming at times, and that's one of the main reasons why we developed the MD&A document, so that people can have a look at the audit and take their time to digest the material, because it can be confusing and frustrating, frankly, because it's a lot of complex numbers that not everybody understands. So I wanted to take a few minutes and just have a look back at 2019 and review and discuss some of the things that I think were very successful and a couple areas I think we can improve on. So we have some pictures here that talk about some of the activities in our company. One of the things that we really focused on and are focusing on more is building a corporate culture that is grounded in the community values. It's aligned with our guiding principles. We get focused on achieving the goals that we've been tasked with from our board and from our community. I'm pleased to report that in 2019 and again in 2020, Development Corporation was recognized as one of Canada's best managed companies. So I'm very proud of that. Another measure that we look at from success fail in terms of our company is something we call direct economic impact. And in previous years, we communicated that our goal as a company was to generate an annual direct economic impact of $150 million every year, commencing in the year 2025. I'm pleased to report that in 2019, our number is 32 million. So we bit off a big chunk. We've got a long ways to go, but nobody can accuse us of not being aggressive in our aspirations, and I think that's what we should be as a company. David touched on it briefly. This past year, we completed our equity purchase, ownership purchase in the Niagara Reinforcement Line, which we were also able to energize with the efforts of A6N. And so that added to our asset value. In addition to that, we've also closed our ownership position of 15% in the Nanticoke Solar Farm. I'm particularly proud of that because that is really an evolution of energy, where an old coal pile was repurposed into a sustainable, clean energy source that will serve the economy for the next 20 to 40 years. Happy to play a role and an investment in that particular project. On the nation enterprise side of things, these would be businesses in the community, in particular bingo. For the year 2019, on a year-over-year basis, we've actually been very successful in growing our revenue through the implementation of new games and new gaming options, to the tune where historically we've averaged about $2.5 million of revenue per month. And prior to COVID-19, we were averaging almost $2.9 million per month. So we had a really nice trend going on. I think we're doing a lot of things right at Bingo. Unfortunately, COVID-19 took a bite out of our operation. In terms of functional aspects of what we do, we as a company have gone through reorganization. We're implementing new systems, new technologies to build efficiencies in the things that we do. Also in the year, we completed the community plan, and we've gone through a process to divest that plan back to the council, because we feel that's the best place where the community plan should sit, because it will get the most power politically with the council. I know David touched briefly on our A6N joint venture. We did have a tough year. The joint venture lost a significant amount of money. Our portion of that loss was about $1.1 million. I mean, largely, we were unsuccessful in realizing profit expectations in a couple of projects, one most notably being the Niagara Reinforcement Line project, where we encountered a community work stoppage, which took some time to sort through. Ultimately, we got it back on track and finished the project. And the other one, which community residents would be aware of, is the installation of our water line, water mains into the community. It's been a learning process for us. We've learned a lot, but it's also been an expensive proposition for us. That's not to say that we're not happy with A6N, because we are. A6N as a company generated over $9.5 million in payroll, and 95% of our employees at A6N are from this community. So when we think about in terms of economic impact, A6N is a tremendous driver of value. Just jumping back to Bingo for a second, Bingo was also very successful beyond just the metrics I gave you. Through their efforts with the Gaming Commission, Bingo was able to host toy bingos and generate almost $160,000 for the year for schools that otherwise wouldn't have that money, and they greatly need it. The sponsor program received over $600,000 in the year, and that goes to fund youth and minor sports and touch our community in meaningful ways. So all in all, with the transfer to the trust this year, $3.4 million, we're very happy that since the inception of our company, we've been able to transparently distribute almost $15 million to meet the needs of our community. And those things go to what Rachel touched on. You know, fire trucks. We're facilitating the construction of housing and safety and programs that typically fall through the gaps in many cases, language programs and cultural funding. I think it's a testament to the hard work of a great team that I have here at the Development Corporation. My management team is fantastic. We've gone through some tough times. Our frontline team has also stepped up. They've weathered the storm with COVID-19, and I'll talk about that in a second. But they really are the ones who've done the heavy lift in this company. It brings me a great pride to look back at 2019 as a year we've had so much success, and it couldn't be possible without them. Last, I want to just say thank you to the Development Corporation Group, and this is all of the collective governance bodies that we have. So the board of directors, who I directly report to, Philip Johnson, I think, is on the call, Claudine Benivri-Albert, I think this is her last meeting, Kim Logan, Justin Porter, and Sarah Montour. And they work very closely with the advisory committee, Nicole Martin, who's on the call, Hilary Vachou, Reva Bomberry, Stephanie Stiers-Deary, and Courtney Sky. They are the group that's responsible for the oversight of the group, of the Development Corporation Group, to ensure that we do things that are aligned with the values and the principles that we are founded upon. And I think the organization in our company that has the most difficult job is the Economic Development Trust. And I know Rachel's on the call. You heard from her earlier. She's the chair. We've got Kathy General, Elena Benivri, Micah Burning, and Andrew Joseph. They've got a really tough job, and their job is to take the money that we transfer to the trust, in this case, $3.4 million this year, and then make judgment calls based on an intake process on how that money gets reinvested. And the reality is our community needs much more than $3.4 million. So it's a tough job to reconcile how those funds get reinvested in the community. From a year in review, I can only say great things about the team and the year itself. I'll just jump right forward to the next discussion point, which is looking forward and post-COVID-19. So David mentioned there is comments in our audit around the impacts of COVID-19. We're not alone. Many community businesses and businesses across the country and globally are suffering from COVID-19. So the reality of it is we've had significant financial and operational impact, and I can say unequivocally that 2020 will not look anything like 2019 financially. We're working very hard to reopen bingo as early as July 1st, subject to the council's approval, and we're hopeful that can be done. We are pivoting all of our operations to match the new reality. I think that the one thing about COVID-19 was it created a cause for pause for us to assess the things that we do and why we do them. It allowed us to dig in and really investigate what our rationale is and what our strategies are. And I think we're going to emerge as a company that's a little bit leaner and a little bit more focused on strategy. Our Autonomy 150 goal is still our pursuit. We are not deviating from that goal of Autonomy 150 by 2025. We have downgraded our goal for 2020 to 28.5 million. And coming into this year for 2020, it was at 39 million. So we've taken a significant write down in terms of our aspirational goal, but it's a practical reality. So some other things we're looking at moving forward into post-COVID-19 reality is we are actively working on enhancing the community. Augment that.
I think you're having some audio trouble there, Matt.
Oh, sorry. I can maybe I'm talking too fast. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's good.
I'm almost done, so I'll let the bullet points speak for themselves. We're looking to upgrade the community broadband internet within the next 6 to 9 months, and we're currently working on the final phase of the Niagara Reinforcement Line project, which includes the possible development of a large battery storage project that can create some significant impact in our community by way of energy conservation, climate change, and bill reduction. That's my forward-looking post. I'll turn it back to you, Nicole.
Great. Thank you very much, David and Philip and Matt, for the insight into our audits, our year in review, as well as looking forward post-COVID-19. We'll open up now for the Q&A session. I haven't seen any additional questions coming in. Looking at the Q&A portion of the app here, I'm not seeing any. I'll take a moment to just thank everybody. I see a lot of our members from the governance group are tuning in as well on the participant list. So thank you very much to those that are attending, as well as to those that are not, for, as Matt said, all the work that has been done throughout the year. Myself, this is my last meeting as well. So I just want to also say I'm very appreciative of my time here. And I see we got a question coming in. So, okay. Definitely, we're open for comments as well. We have a comment coming in that we'll get to in a second from one of our members. So what we've seen over the year, it looks like there's still definitely a lot going on with the Development Corporation. Certainly, we're no stranger to being impacted to COVID-19 like many organizations are, but it sounds like we're still hopeful. And let me just check and see if we have that comment. No. And we still got a lot of exciting things happening, and we may be even looking to open up our bingo coming soon, which was exciting news for some of my aunts for sure. They'll be excited to know that. Okay, and then we also have a comment from Claudine, one of our members for the Board of Directors. This is her last meeting, and she would like to say, "Nyawa to all those with whom I have worked at the Board of Directors table." So also now to you, Claudine, for the large amount of work that you have completed over your period here with the Board of Directors. Very much appreciated. And she's also wanting to say that she would like to thank all the staff as well. Definitely some very hardworking staff at the Development Corporation. Throughout my meetings there, I've seen amazing work is being done. They're very dedicated and committed to their jobs. And Claudine also wishing everybody good luck going forward. Okay, so we'll do one last call. Let's see if we got any other questions coming in. Other than that, is there anybody from the panel that would like to say a few words as we close out the meeting? Okay, so I guess that's it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to our virtual annual general meeting here. I'm wishing everybody well, and thanks a lot.